maybe this interesting mix of private sector and organizations, including government, will give us those extra interesting elements to make a recipe so that we can see success within a year, not even within 5 years or 20 years. So the first round of questions is basically to all of you, and I'll start over there. What is the role and contribution of your company or your entity to women's economic empowerment? The kind of big picture ideas. And what are the values that you bring to the bigger picture debate?
So, good afternoon. I'm very pleased to be here and to see again Phumzile as well. So what can I say about the contribution that my company? I believe a lot in the power of example. So we all have a role. We all can have a role. IKEA Switzerland has been certified now since almost 6 years with gender equality on the highest level. It means that we have the 50-50 composition of our workforce in all ranks of the organization, and it means that we have equal pay and also that we have policies that allow this to be sustainable. So we somehow eliminated this sticky floor. But the good news is that this is not been detrimental to the business. I think that there is a big alibi going around that, but it would be nice to have gender equality, but it's costly, it's difficult, we don't find the women. There is a list, isn't it? And now we are really sick and tired with these propositions, because actually reality shows a different picture. You still can have a fantastic performance or a fantastic pleasant workplace. Actually, I believe personally they go hand in hand and still be equal. So the values, it's that gender equality is a human right, so we stand for human rights, and why should we not stand for it?
Muriel, I've got a...
Just maybe a few words about myself. I'm 52, I'm French, married to a German. I have 4 children, aged between 17 and 27. And I've done almost all of my career at Nestlé, in Nestlé Germany, Nestlé France, Nestlé Waters globally, and now since a few months leading Nestlé Switzerland. So I'm very happy to be with those panelists. Maybe I would like to refer a bit to my personal values and that have been guiding me. And I always think about my 2 grandmothers. And one of my grandmother was one of the first person to study law in France, and I was very proud of her. And the other one was a Dutch grandmother who was speaking 5 languages, and I was also very proud of her. And I keep those values with me, and I'm very proud now of my 4 children that also take those values and proud of those values. Proud of my 2 daughters, but to your point, even more proud of my 2 sons that are also carrying and promoting the gender balance. And obviously proud to work at Nestlé. Nestlé is a company committed to diversity and inclusion. And Nestlé has, on the one side, put a lot of commitment to provide equal opportunity for everyone, but also, and this is important, and I will come back to that, really put it into action, put gender balance at the top of the HR agenda, and make sure that we have the business environment and the business practices to make it happen. And that's what I'm working, and that's what I'm passionate about every day, to make those practices happen on a daily basis in the company.
Sehr gut, muy bien. We're in a multilateral and multilingual country. Mary Ellen, what are the values and what's your organization really thinking of in a big way for women's economic empowerment?
Well, Jane, you identified very, very well that for over 40 years, or no, nearly 40 years, next year is our 40th anniversary, we really have been singularly dedicated at Women's World Banking to providing not just access to finance, but making sure that women have control over those financial resources. And we've taken decades of data and experience so that we know what their pain points are, what are some of the questions that they're most likely to ask, where they feel they may not be respected by the formal financial sector, and then we share all of those insights with initially microfinance institutions. Our work started very much in the microfinance world, but particularly as we've seen digital technology just ramp up into the present day and become the way that we are reaching those without financial services. We're now working with many mobile network operators, mainstream banks, insurance companies, retailers, would love to do some work with IKEA, fast-moving consumer goods companies. The partnerships that we're engaging in today, we would never have predicted 40 years ago. And we work with those partners in 3 specific ways. We help them design solutions to engage women customers. You know, you've probably heard the line about pink products. We don't really believe there are pink financial products, but there are some really important things you need to include in a product, in the way that you market that product, in the way that you explain it to women before they're going to take that up. We also invest in women-focused financial institutions and have found enormous impact and enormous power as a shareholder and a board member sitting around the table in the way a financial service provider does their business. And then last but absolutely not least, and again, Simona made reference to this, we believe so strongly that gender-diverse financial service providers are going to be much more likely to reach out to women customers. And so we provide a whole range of leadership and diversity training programs, partnering with the Wharton School. And then in the beginning of next year, we're very excited, we'll be doing a similar kind of training for regulators, central bankers, insurance regulators, other government officials, and we'll be partnering with Oxford. But I would love to just say another quick word about the values, because I think that is such an important question. Women's World Banking has grown dramatically in the last 8 years. We've more than doubled our size, and we really felt that we perhaps were taking our values a little bit for granted, and we needed to articulate them as we brought more people on, as we opened up more offices that had more presence outside of our home base in New York. And so we created sort of three big values. The first one is think big, and that's really all about reaching scale. There are still 1 billion women with no access to financial services at all, and it's probably closer to 2 billion if you think about inclusion and financial inclusion really being more than just having a simple bank account that you don't use, but actually engaging with the financial system. The second value is own it and commit to it. And that's why I'm so excited that we're going to be doing some hands-on workshop work later today, because it's not enough just to name the barriers and to identify the problem. You've really got to be a part of that solution. And then the third one that I think, again, speaks so much to the group we have here today, but also to this broader set of partnerships. And that third value is that we're smarter together. And rather than going off and reinventing the wheel, bringing all that we know together and working together is going to be the way that we find a solution to gender equality as soon as possible. I love the idea of an expiration date for gender inequality.
Yes, due date. Thomas.
Thank you, Jane. Actually, I'm quite at ease here with CEOs on this panel. The part of the company that I run invests about $500 million in 21 countries. Our shareholders are the Swiss taxpayers. And so I think that we have a lot to learn from each other and to work together. I think makes a lot of sense. And I think my dear friend Phumzile gave the task that we have. We have to front load SDG 5. We have to make sure that gender equality is not reached at the end of the time of the 2030 agenda, but actually at the beginning, because it is an accelerator, and even I would say an essential accelerator for a lot of the other goals. And this is something we totally need. No country and no company is going to be sustainable We are only going to be sustainable together if we all reach there. So we need to invest in that. And so you ask me, what do we do? I think if we are not deliberate about promoting gender equality, we will not get there. And that's something that we learned from a study that we did recently about our investment into gender equality over the last 10 years. It's been already 10 years since we've been working on that, since we've been asking every project, every program, what are you doing? Who are your beneficiaries? Disaggregate the data. Tell us how the money is actually getting there. And after 10 years looking at it, we found if we're not deliberate about it, we're not getting there. We're not making that change. We're not pushing the dial, really. So that's what we learned. And I mean, my boss here, Markus Seiler, reminded that this is also true in security. So we have to get beyond projects where women do beads and things like that. I mean, this is important. But I mean, we want to see women that are in the financial world, that are in the economic world, that lead cooperatives, for example, etc. And so this is how we need to push our own objectives as well. And then finally, we need to walk the talk. We need to walk the talk in our own organizations. I actually don't believe that we can achieve change if we are not the change. No, if our own institutions are not really gender equal and gender parity is not there. So I mean, I'm going to out myself here. We have about 30% of women in our top management, top cadre, and that's not enough. Thank you.
So, I hope, like me, you're taking some big messages already about the importance of values, the importance of role models, the importance of living the messages, and some very concrete ideas already, which I hope are not unknown to you. Things like analysing the results, never taking things for granted, always going back and checking, and doing it scientifically with some really good metrics behind you. And of course, this amazing story of moving into commitments, just living it within your organisations and your companies. So let's now go a bit deeper with each of our panellists. I'm going to start with Simona. Business culture practice, policies are obviously major drivers of women's economic empowerment. But beyond the common sense, this is the right thing to do, this is a good, feel-good moment, more and more companies, as we heard, in fact, from the keynote address as well, are realising that there is a really strong business case. And we should be proud to say that by doing the right thing, you're actually going to be making a buck as well. So the business value of women's economic empowerment came out very much from the UN Secretary General's panel that you kindly co-chaired. Could I ask you to give a few key findings from that work, that over 2 years, particularly the tools that can be used to enhance representation of women across the corporate pipeline? Here we're really drawing on your corporate expertise. And a tricky last question for many of us, but it goes back centuries, the work-life balance conundrum. Because in every society there is an imbalance, and it has been around for decades. No matter how much research has been done, the burden does tend to fall for family care and household care on the female shoulders. And men are moving forward. We've heard about the importance of partnering with men, but there are so many studies actually even about unfair hours spent per day on housework, much less talking about the actual elderly care or childcare. So I'd really appreciate your thoughts, and from the IKEA side, of the role of the workplace in finding work-family balance.
So very articulated question. But let's start with a report that was issued by the high-level panel, especially the second report, the one that you have been showing. We had a very precise input from the Secretary General. It has to be succinct, and in fact it is succinct. It has to be transformational, and it has to be actionable. And when it comes to the part related to what companies can do, it's a couple of pages, but it definitely is actionable. There are some suggestions. The first one is very simple, because any company on any dimension, any size, in any industry can apply, is a self-assessment, which goes from do we apply equal pay, yes or no? What is the level of employment, female, male, in the company? Where is the level of leadership? Is there a percentage in leadership positions? Procurement, do we access companies that are owned by women? And our corporate social responsibility actions are addressing gender equality. Very simple question. Any organization can answer, and even in the worst case scenario, when the answer is really on the weak side, you still have space to start an action plan on it. And then we also provided some recommendations, such as give clear goal and measurement tools. What you measure, you get. And rarely companies have really in their KPIs, maybe the most advanced do, but sometimes it is forgotten to give this as an important KPI. So very important to notice that that report has also links to best practices that company can escalate and also copy simply. So it's very operational and very actionable. The advantages. Oh, the advantages are so many. You know, you mentioned it as well. I can mention some of them. For instance, we talk so much about the war for talent. And I always would like to cancel this terminology, war everywhere. Can we stop talking war and making peace and work together and thrive instead of talking war all the time? But we are competing for talents, and we ignore half of the talent pool. So when, in fact, we address also that talent pool, the overall quality of the talent workforce increases. Another example is related to, as you were saying, mirroring the customer base and being able to satisfy better the customer's needs. So to become more commercial and more competitive. Something also very important is related to the creativity that is deployed in an organization that has a gender balanced or a diverse in general workforce. Because when you face a problem or an issue coming from different perspectives, then normally the result is on a higher level. So just, and I could talk for hours, but these are very tangible and very real effects. And the last part I forgot that you asked.
In finding this work-life balance.
The work-life balance. Yeah, the work-life balance, you know, there is an imbalance in society, especially now that women are also accessing the world of work. Paradoxically, there's not the same amount of work provided by men in the family. But we need to remove some cultural biases, but we can also help as an organization, providing different setups, giving more flexibility in the workplace, both for men and women. So also men are encouraged or put in the conditions to support more the family. We at IKEA Switzerland, for instance, have introduced paternity leave. We give 2 months. You know, in this country, it's 2 days, I think, and now we give 2 months. But in some countries like Sweden, is a year.
Yeah.
So you can do a lot of things. You need to plan for it. Nothing comes, out of spontaneous reactions, but it's actionable. But this triggers a different mentality as well.
Yeah.
So I think, again, the example is important.
Exactly, and that kind of very practical involvement of women and men goes back to this issue of inclusiveness, and that, I mean, for decades people have been trying gender equality. We didn't start it in the 2000s, but in the 2000s, but it's because all parties need to be involved. Muriel, we're hearing a very interesting personal story and the commitment of Nestlé to workplace gender equality. But what are the main barriers facing women here in Switzerland? And how does Nestlé incorporate good practices in the business strategy right down the value chain?
Thank you. So first, I think, I mean, there are still some barriers, but I see also some good progress in Switzerland. But when obviously the barriers, we see too few women in management. Even if we have, I'm very proud that in Switzerland we have 40% at Nestlé Switzerland. It's still not enough because we want to have 50%. It's above the average in Switzerland, but for me, clearly not enough. And we still have a gender pay gap, which is obviously part of the results of not having enough women in top management. Although these can be attributed to some individual choices and the different career path of each individual woman, I think we also need to acknowledge that this is a failure of the work labor, and that we as public and companies obviously need to address it together. And also for me, some behavioral differences that are also embedded in the Swiss, I would say, behavior and Swiss culture. And I think it's important for every of us as a manager, but also as individual, to try to overcome those barriers and to do that on a daily basis. Maybe just what's important for us at Nestlé, I see it at three levels. First, we have some strong commitments. We've been in September doing a pledge which is really providing equal opportunity for everyone with the value of respect and dignity. And furthermore, then enhancing and putting gender balance at all levels and promoting gender balance at all levels of the workplace, also pledging for the workforce to achieve equal pay for employees. So this is the first and an important thing. Then for me, the second thing is really to embed gender balance in all the HR practices, from the recruitment to the succession planning to promotion. For example, we have on each succession plan for the key position in Nestlé, we have at least one woman, and we make sure that these women get the plan and the development plan to make sure that they have the real opportunity to get each of the position where they are on the plan. But we also have coaching, we have mentoring, we are promoting a lot of network. I created myself the network of women in France when I was in France. So I think it's also very important. And those networks are not only for women, but they also include men, obviously. And the third thing is really to support women in balancing the job and family, and this is very important for us. We try to provide childcare support. We have a service partnering with nursery. Also promote flexible time, and again we need to live by example. And I just took over the Swiss market a few months ago, and I also made it clear myself that I would take also some flexible time. I still have one child at home, and I really led by example. And at the beginning, I asked my HR, I say, should I say it or not? Because I will do it. And she said, yes, obviously, you need to say it, and you need to lead by example. And I think it's very important to show, whatever level you are in the organization, that we all need this balance between work life and job.
That's an interesting point, because it also brings in this idea that we were talking earlier about stereotypes and cultures, and it was also mentioned in the keynote, but this idea that men stay later. That means they're better workers. We don't know what they're actually doing later in the office or on the computer. But where are the women? Why aren't they staying later? And where did this culture of overwork become so masculine and valued as a masculine thing? Whereas the women actually are working really hard on their other work, whether it be family or actually having a bit of time for themselves. That's an excellent addition to our little toolbox, our little elements that we might be able to mix together in an hour or so and see whether we've found the winning formula. I'm actually going to turn to Thomas next. So we've heard some really good examples from the private sector, and Switzerland should be rightly proud of these multinationals, big companies. But from your point of view as a public actor engaged in the development context, how do you engage with the private sector to economically empower women? We heard of a Tajikistan project earlier on, but what is the agency doing?
Well, I mean, as a public actor, obviously, people and our shareholders feel that we should be a little bit more, let's say, on the public side of let's say, the global needs, and take care of some of the things like education, for example. There's still so much to do to get girls into schools, to make sure they complete schools. Vocational training, we have a lot of programs in vocational training, making sure that those are not just strengthening the stereotypes and the biases that already exist. And in countries with which we partner, that is frequently also the case, even stronger sometimes than in Switzerland. So there's a lot to be done there. But we also need to change our way of working in development cooperation generally. And we need to ask ourselves in every situation, is there not a viable partnership with the private sector that could be built in order to tackle an issue? And I think that's a shift in paradigm. Now, and we have to do that because the task is just too big to be able to accomplish it with just the funds that we have, the public funds. And there, of course, we have to, in the negotiations, in the discussions with the private sector, and as with all of our development partners, we need to talk KPIs. We need to talk about what are we expecting in terms of progress, how are we going to measure it, and also how those partners are walking the talk. Markus Seiler early on mentioned this code of ethics that we have. We also apply that to our partners. So the treating the woman with respect, not abusing the asymmetry of power that exists, is absolutely critical. But then also sharing our vision that women can be in completely different places in the economy, and that makes perfect economic and political sense. That is important. So I'm very proud that we work, for example, with Women World Banking, and for example in Jordan, to make sure that women get insurance, health insurance, and life insurance. Now, imagine normally when you die, who gets your life insurance? Your husband, no? If you're a woman. And so how do we change that? How do we tweak those tools and those instruments so that actually there is an insurance paid to the woman if the man dies, for example, etc. So there are some very concrete things that can be done in our programs.
So the Swiss taxpayers will be looking to see those KPIs. But we're coming back again to this idea of always going back and testing and measuring and verifying that the way we're working is going well. Mary Ellen, so to get rid of the, these permeating inequalities, women need to have access, as men do, to disparities in finance and property. Surely one of the barriers so far has been the lack of financial inclusion. Can you speak to that, particularly in the fourth industrial revolution period?
Certainly, but as I say, let's not just focus on the barriers, but on the solutions as well. But over the last year, Women's World Banking did really a fascinating piece of work, I think. We looked across the 7 largest markets where if you combine all of the un- and underbanked women, you'd get about 80% of that 2 billion women outside the formal financial system. And we thought we were going to see very different barriers in the different markets. And unfortunately, we saw some real similarities. And there were barriers at the woman level, you know, things that she was facing. There were barriers amongst the financial service providers, and then there were barriers at the government level as well. Amongst the women, it was really fascinating in the sense that they had very low financial literacy and even awareness of what was available to them. But what's becoming of even greater concern, it's a huge opportunity, but a concern as well, is that their digital literacy and their awareness of the opportunity of technology and even of their access to technology. There are 200 million fewer phones owned by women than by men. Many women are very comfortable in a shared phone ownership model in order to make phone calls or even to look at information, but a woman will be the first one to say, I'm not going to bank on a shared cell phone. I did hear a wonderful story just earlier this week. In Tanzania, many countries have this group savings model, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. They've now moved that to a digital phone system where each woman has a SIM card, and her savings are on that SIM card, and so there's only one phone. But they plug the card into the phone. So the access to technology is critical. In fact, the reason I'm so worried about it is in the latest data we have on financial inclusion, we saw some of the countries that have been most farsighted in terms of digital technology as a means for financial inclusion, such as Bangladesh or Pakistan. You saw the gender gap more than double in those countries because women didn't have access to the technology in order to take advantage of that great opportunity. In terms of the financial service providers themselves, and we've now had it mentioned by many of the speakers today, unfortunately, financial service providers still don't see the business opportunity. They don't see the investment in serving this women's market. And everybody who's talked about gender disaggregated data already, I would only underscore that. You don't know what your clients are doing if you're not measuring them as distinct, gender disaggregated clients. As an investor, that's probably been one of the most, I think, impactful thing we've done. Every financial institution that we invest in has to provide us gender disaggregated data. We are able to say to them, look at this data. Why are you so intent on lending to only male entrepreneurs when your loan repayment rates for women are so much better? Why are the stickier depositors that stay with you over longer periods of time and save more regularly, maybe smaller amounts, but more regularly, they're women. They're not men. Why are you not actively going after those clients? In the developed world and the developing world, women buy more insurance than men do. So if you don't have the data to tell you that, you really don't know how to serve them.
Now that's a strong message coming out today, isn't it? So in the last 5 minutes before we turn to you, I'd like to ask all 4 of you, perhaps starting with Thomas, what about the due date of 2030, but what would be the future of the world of work? How do you see it? Just a quick snapshot of what you think the world would be like and how we've got there.
Well, I think we need to realize that gender equality and gender equity is not a social agenda. It makes perfect economic sense, and it's an essential accelerator to achieve the 2030 agenda. So I actually think that it has a lot to do with the mindset of people. And maybe we could start in the schools. We could start with making sure that our kids learn that and that we walk the talk for them. No?
Mary-Ellen.
So I think one of the most exciting, getting back to that data point, there's been some really exciting work done. And at the launch of the SDGs, McKinsey did a really wonderful piece of work. I'm sure many of you saw it. But they argued and showed very, very convincingly that if women were participating in the labor force at the same level that men were, we would be able to add $28 trillion to global GDP by 2030. Well, I think it was 2030. Thank you. So that's an extraordinary number. So I'd like to think that we'll actually start to see some of that dividend paid. 28 trillion is a pretty big number, but we'll be able to start seeing some of that dividend. And financial inclusion is going to be a big enabler of that. Digital financial services are estimated to contribute up to $3.7 trillion of that number to GDP growth. And I completely agree with, I like that term, front-loading SDG 5, but what we really want to do is make sure that financial inclusion that can enable all of the other SDGs as well. When women have access and control over financial resources, the first thing they invest in is their child's education, SDG 4. They invest in their family's health care, SDG 3. Water and sanitation is a huge priority for women, SDG 6. You're going to hit all of those targets if you financially and economically include women by 2030 or before.
Right, and I see you're wearing the badge.
Yes.
So what do you think, Muriel, the future? What will we have achieved? What will it look like?
So I think from a corporate point of view and what we can change, obviously we need to continue to do everything that we do today, but I think the most important is we need really to accelerate, and to accelerate we need to have women in leadership position, enough women in the boards to have the visibility, to lead by example, and to really show by example that economically it makes sense. And this requires board leadership and a big acceleration on having women represented at board levels, executive board levels.
Very good points.
Thank you. Well, I would like to take the topic from another angle that is most probably complementary to what has been said so far, because we have an agenda basically worldwide. That is the SDGs agenda. Companies have their own agenda in that direction, but the pace is far too slow, as Phumzile was also underlining. We need to become much more vocal on this topic and really showcase the good example with more frequency. But I just want to tell you a story. I joined Switzerland and the Swiss IKEA organization 8 years ago. And I started to work towards gender equality with my team, and I started to meet people in this country. And I come from Italy. I was asked 7 years ago, let's say, how do you see, because more or less Italy and Switzerland had the same low level of gender equality in terms of leadership position in different fields. And what I said at the time was that, I mean, if we have different, the same level, but for different reasons, and I was more optimistic for Switzerland. And in fact, Switzerland has advanced, and unfortunately, Italy has gone backwards significantly, and I'm sorry about that. But why I saw this glimpse of hope in Switzerland, and I'm very pleased to be here today, is because the Swiss culture is much more pragmatic, and there is an admirable interest in the common good. So when you start hearing people from the ministry saying, we see the advantage, this is going to happen. So my wish is that Switzerland is positioning as a country in the forefront in different fields. It's one of the most competitive countries, it's one of the most innovative countries. We have participated last week to this digital day because Switzerland wants to become the platform, at least for Europe, for digitalization. Environmental topics, also there are a lot of initiatives where the government partners with companies and with the civil society. Let's do it structurally the same for gender equality. And maybe even before 2030, we celebrate with the great party fireworks that Switzerland is the first country in the world that has reached gender equality.
Yes. Wow. Well, that was a nice sort of word. But we haven't finished yet. Let's take 4 questions. Please identify yourselves by name, your affiliation, and who would you like on the panel to respond to you?
Hello, and thank you very much for being here. I'm totally biased. I have 2 goals: more women in politics and more politics in workplaces, but good politics. As we have heard from Secretary General from UN Women, you also want to encourage to have more women in politics. In Switzerland, we have a militia system, and we see that more and more it is difficult to combine not only family and work, but family, work and politics, especially for women. What do you do to achieve both goals, to have more women in your like in management positions, as well as more women in politics who can also be active in a workplace?
And you are?
My name is Beatrice Wertley, and I'm becoming president of the CVP party in the canton of Bern, which is the Christian Democratic Party.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
So I have an observation and a question, in fact, because from my point of view, there is no reason nowadays to even discuss the issue that men and women are equal. They have the equal value, they should all have the equal rights, treatment, etc. So from my point of view, that's not the issue. What I'm a bit worried, or where I see a danger, is for women to strive for getting into the positions and doing the things men did wrong in the past. So, of course, it's good to be submitted to capital and to have capital. The issue is, do we want women to serve capital instead of capital serve humankind? So is it really the right thing for all women to be fully engaged at work and all men to be fully engaged at work? And if yes, well, then who cares for the weaker family members? Do we want to have an increase in earnings in the enterprises? Is that the main goal, or do we also want to care for doing that in a social manner, promoting equality, not hampering the environment?
And that's
is it
a question
right for
directed
all
to
CEOs, all female CEOs,
sector.
to earn as much as men CEOs?
Right.
Or do we want to have
questions.
both to earn less to have a more equal world? So that's my point. Thank you.
We might leave that one for the corporates to answer. Did this mic work in the end?
Yes.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Maria Fonkenen, and I'm the founder of the Race Awareness Day, International Family Equality Day. I would like to ask you, how do you reach women which are facing double discrimination or multiple discrimination? Because as we know, as well, the UN has recognized that lesbian, bi, and trans women are facing, based on gender and gender identity discrimination, but as well women with disability. So I would like to know how you tackle that and how you empower the girls and women.
Thank you.
Spontaneous reflection from the many questions and a very personal opinion here. So take it as it is. I believe that people come first, anytime. People come first, and the well-being of people, of families, of society at large need to be a major goal, an overarching goal for countries, of course, but also for companies. So whatever is aimed at improving people's life, it's good. Maybe it's a bit simplistic, but this is the approach that I normally use. So more women at work should not be, I don't see the equation. If more women work, then company have a profit and society has a problem, or family are disregulated. We need to start from the people and build around the world where through flexibility, through balance in the relationship, through mutual contribution, the well-being increases.
Yeah. Just as a rope becomes stronger by weaving several strands, surely that's a message. To the question of multiple discrimination, would you? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for that really important question. I think it's a question of human rights, and discrimination in itself is bad. And so, at least in our programs, in a way, the foreign policy of Switzerland is oriented. We strongly support the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and it has to apply to everyone. And there are many forms of multiple discrimination, and this is one which is important. To be honest, it's also difficult to sometimes put the finger right on the issue of LGBTI, for example, in projects, because obviously we work in partnership with governments, but let's make sure that really the universal human rights are right up front in our programs and are now part of our KPIs as well. And maybe if you allow me just quickly, the issue that was raised about, that was somewhat pitting a little bit the economic growth against the social. I don't think that's really, I think the 2030 agenda is actually moving beyond that. And it's really about how to make sure that all economic flows and all economic forces are working towards that common agenda. And we are really proud that the private sector has been front and center on that. I mean, IKEA, the companies that are represented here, but so many others, the International Chamber of Commerce, etc. And they are actually drawing conclusions. Maybe it's important for me to say that the private sector is drawing conclusions for themselves on what they have to do to implement the 2030 agenda. And I think a lot of countries could still learn a little from how the private sector is doing that.
Yeah, they're good reflections. One or two last questions.
My question is, we're talking about work-life balance, we're talking about politics, women in politics, in work, at home, and so on. And now, in my opinion, what we see is that there are always individual solutions. Women work part-time when they become mothers, men tend to work more when they become fathers. But this, in my opinion, can't be the solution. At the same time, we're losing sometimes workplaces, we have digitalization, and the trade union women at their last Congress this winter, they asked for a general working hours reduction. So, and I think, yeah, just the digitalization and so on, that could be a solution. It would not be today or tomorrow, but it could be a solution. What do you think of that? A general working time reduction for everybody. Okay. And at least the lowest wages should stay the same.
That's an interesting one. We'll see who on the panel wants to take that one. And the last question.
I would like to ask the two ladies who are the CEO of these big companies, one that has been very successful in achieving gender equality and one that is doing her very best to do so. What are the challenges that you have experienced in kind of trying to reach gender equality and gender balance in your company, and what are the resistances? How have you managed to deal with that? And to the CEO from the Women's World Banking, as a women's organization, what is the business model or the business approach that women and feminist organization can be as role models? And if a quick question to Thomas as well, why is it so difficult for governments to implement really effective parental policies who have been successful in many countries? Why is it taking so long?
So we started with awareness, because sometimes you never get there because you have some biases in your organization. So the approach was, this is not about now denying opportunities for men and give opportunities only to women. It's nothing that this has nothing to do with antagonizing one each other, but it's more about cooperating. So when this comes clear, then we started introducing policies that facilitated the process. For instance, we request a gender-balanced shortlist for hirings, for promotions. It's very simple tools, but effective. And we gave goals, as we said. And thirdly, we also took initiatives that were valid, as you say, both for men and women. We don't want to fix the women. We want to create a better working place.
Yeah.
So both for men and women.
Right.
Just in a nutshell. And
news from Nestlé.
I think I've mentioned earlier the best practices that we have, and these have been key. A lot of work also on the culture. We have regular training about unconscious bias throughout the organization, and that's really important. And maybe to my personal, because your question is what has been difficult. I think most of the time it was just myself not really believing in the next step and not asking for the next step. And I was lucky to have always coaches, mentors, people to look at in the organization and to talk. And what I'm doing today is really try to give back what I've got during my path at Nestlé. And I think that's very important. That's also why we need more women at the top, because usually when they've experienced this path, and it's not an easy one, they're really strong at giving back. Yeah, and I think that's really important.
I think since so many of really all of our partners are in the private sector, we've worked hard to make sure that incentives are aligned, and we know what is the incentive of the individual leader or of the company. And I'll just tell a quick story.
No time for quick stories. Okay. Incentives. So it's not just sticks, it's carrots. Profit from the networking time afterwards to get hold of Mary Ellen. Nope.
Sorry. So just quickly, why do governments not implement, or administrations, I think, not implement parental policies? I think if you want to implement good parental policies, you need to have good gender equity in the decisive levels of an organization. Where this gets discussed, you need to have sufficient gender equity there. Then you can push it. But you also need to have the political space that is created around. But I see you don't agree, so maybe we can talk afterwards.
Thanks. Sorry to butt in again. I just thought I should emphasize on this question of the care and whether we're abandoning the family. Actually, the actual argument that is made by the United Nations in the Sustainable Development Goals in relation to care work is that we have to redistribute it because somebody has to do it. But it should not be women alone, that we have to regulate it so that we're able to gauge what is too much and what is needed and what is too little. And that we have to also remunerate it, which is why we want social policy, in order to make sure that when a woman has worked at home all her life looking after everybody, then when everyone leaves the nest, she's not left alone, poverty-stricken. So it is about the macroeconomic context, recognizing that someone takes care of somebody, and that the institutions have to take care of that. And I just also want to highlight a topic we did not discuss, sexual harassment at the workplace. It is a big issue that hinders women's economic empowerment and participation. We need to make sure that we have the policies, that we implement the policies, and that those who lead institutions lead from the front on this issue, because leadership is the single most important voice that helps to change the trajectory of sexual harassment at the workplace. Thank you.
Yes, and that's a good point. And it's a good list. Some of these we've heard, some of these we might have just heard the extra data about. But your wisdom and your experiences are amazing. Thank you.
And I would like to thank the Foreign Department, Marco Seiler, and his team, especially also Regine, having organized that. The same thank to Maria, Foraus, Lucas, and the whole team. I think it's a good step in this year. And as you may know, UN Women and UN Global Compact have in 2010 launched these women empowerment principles. A call to all members of the private sector. Please make use of these tools. You find it on our both websites. Make this analysis of your company. And then you will have, or we will have, the incentive to push forward. Because for us as UN Global Compact, it's clear sustainable business is successful business. But this success is only possible if women are included in these processes, because joint teams give better results. That is proven. We as local network will go on this path, especially with small and medium-sized companies. We didn't speak of them. They are not hardly here. There is the biggest challenge. And we are looking forward with very concrete, practical, simple issues to have at the end of the year a KPI. Where do we stand in relation to empowerment, inclusion of women and disabled and weaker people? Thank you very much. I'm looking forward for further discussions and collaboration.
So, dear Madam Executive Director, dear Phumzile, dear Markus Seiler, Excellencies, distinguished panelists, dear friends, thank you so much for your motivational speech. It gave me hope. Thank you. And thank you, Secretary General, for being such a generous host of this conference and also for promoting this important topic within the Foreign Office. Thank you to all the panelists, because you have been able to share best practices which can help us all in our organizations to advance this important topic. Thank you so much. Now, I'm the president of foraus. Foraus is a wordplay which only works in German. It stands for Forum Außenpolitik, but it also stands for to go ahead. And I think if we want to go ahead, this topic of women empowerment, of course, is absolutely key. So I am thrilled that our think tank Foraus, Swiss Forum on Foreign Policy, is co-hosting this conference on women's empowerment. Our goal as a think tank is to give young people a voice in foreign policy. A voice that is heard on the political level. A voice that leads to concrete and high-quality recommendations for decision makers. The empowerment of women is absolutely key for this. It is absolutely fundamental for us as an organization to not only reduce barriers for women in our workplace, but also proactively encourage them to claim their voice in society. To achieve this, we have just launched our thematic group on gender last year. One of the publications will be published shortly. It looks at how we can make gender work in the Swiss labor market in order to be in line with our international agreements. So I'm very proud to be part of a movement towards the full and equal inclusion of women in the world of work, and I hope you have enjoyed this conference as much as I did. And that if you go back to your workplace this afternoon or tomorrow, you will be able to bring some of the knowledge and the insights you've gained today with you. Because as Vincent van Gogh, I don't know if he was a feminist at his time, but as he has once said, great things are not done by impulse, but by a series of small things brought together. I'm very much looking forward to exchanging some of the ideas further with you, and to all other guests, thank you so much for coming and enjoy your afternoon.
So I think the message here today is that there is definitely a commitment towards gender equality at work and women's greater participation in workplaces. The CEOs of the companies showed that it is doable, at least from the CEO of IKEA that has done a great job, and there are other works being done. But there is also and understanding that we have a lot of work to do and there are some great challenges. I think the challenges are both at the cultural level, where there are a lot of entrenched beliefs around women's participation and women's capabilities and competences, and some inherent and implicit gender biases, but also at policy level, where we need better policy that can support caretaking and distribution of care at home and the work-life balance that can also empower women and allow women and kind of overcome some of the critical barriers that there are for women's participation in the workplace.
For me, it's absolutely clear sustainable business is successful business. But successful business is only possible if women have equal participation in management decision, in the culture of the company. So it's crucial to have more women at the level of management, of decision making. We will take profit out of it as a society, because we know also that women are much more sensible for societal issues. So the UN Global Compact is strongly together with UN Women pushing this approach to include much more women in the private sector.
The take-home message from today for me was that we need men as our best allies to have progress for women in the workplace. So we need to reach out to men. It stuck with me that we said we women need to push the door and to ask the man just to open it politely from the inside. This will be a source of great progress for all.